Azeroth, a realm of heroes, and a land of myth. From the hallowed halls of Stormwind Keep to the nebulous stars of the Outlands, the Warcraft universe has forged its epic tale in pen and pixels for more than a decade. Before the mighty Medivh ever lifted his wizard staff, the universe's legacy would be birthed in much simpler times, in the strange and not so far planet Earth.
The tides of darkness are now at hand.
The year is 1982. Gamers were hot on the heels of the saucy Miss Pac-Man, while a little-known Japanese company kept barrels and quarters rolling with Donkey Kong. It was a burgeoning scene that thrived on action, where every gamer's worth was measured in pixel-perfect leaps and carefully timed laser blasts. Elsewhere, ambitious young programmers like Don Daglow had other ideas. 1982's Utopia for Intellivision didn't ask players to jump, but instead left that task for someone else to complete, as a battle raged on between two warring nations. Decisions weren't executed but assigned, as control zipped back and forth over a number of buildings and units on the player's side of the map. Forts had to be fortified, fish needed to be caught, and the occasional rebel soldier made its unwarranted appearance to hinder your progress. For the first time, players were bestowed the role of commander, and there were certainly a lot more factors at stake than a princess held captive by a huge ape. In the years to come, many other games would follow in Utopia's footsteps, cultivating an unusual new genre that packed a lot of ideas but lacked a name. It's difficult today to give Utopia a proper classification, but many would agree that its emphasis on resource gathering, competition, and combat formed the tenets for what we now refer to as real-time strategy. Or if you prefer your way around hotkeys, the RTS. Nearly 10 years after Utopia claimed conquest on the Intellivision, a relatively unknown game studio named Silicon and Synapse entered the scene in 1991. Founded by UCLA grads Alan Adam, Michael Morheim, and Frank Pierce, the upstart development team found business with a number of Amiga, Commodore, Macintosh, and Windows video game ports, as well as a handful of original titles like Rock and Roll Racing and The Lost Vikings. Slowly growing in success, the team shed its skin in 1994 with a brief name change to Chaos Studios. But after a naming conflict with the pre-existing company, the team inevitably settled on Blizzard Entertainment, and the name has stuck ever since. With a few years of experience under its belt, Blizzard pooled its efforts and interests into a new IP that would showcase its expertise. But it needed direction. It was rumored at one point that the team's love for swords and sorcery brought them to a joint collaboration with UK-based Games Workshop for a PC adaptation of its Warhammer series, a popular fantasy tabletop game. The alleged deal never went through, and no such game ever came to light. But what did emerge from Blizzard's early brainstorming efforts was a game that would harken back to the past, in more ways than one. Warcraft, Orcs and Humans was released on January 15, 1994. Seeking to highlight large-scale battles and unique fantasy characters, Blizzard inevitably settled on real-time strategy for the game's genre. Like Utopia before it, Orcs and Humans brought the struggle of two rival nations to bear, but this time, its players were more than just pixelated blips on a map. Rather, they were fully realized races that took up separate roles in the battle for Dominion. Whose side became the victor was entirely up to you.
In the Age of Chaos, two factions battled for dominance. The Kingdom of Azeroth was a prosperous one.
The first story of Warcraft's history introduced players to the distant land of Azeroth, where the Kingdom of Man suddenly found themselves under siege by a race of savage green-skinned orcs. Documented in separate journals by Lothar, a human knight, and Garona, a half-orc assassin, the events of Orcs and Humans would later be coined the First War. referencing the first interaction and conflict between the two races. The narrative was deep, but rough, relegating most of Warcraft's in-game story elements to simple cutscenes between each mission.
With Black Hand's raiding parties routed, now is the time for us to secure a lasting peace in the area around Grand Hamlet.
But even early on, Blizzard's eye for polish showed. Orcs and Humans made extensive use of voiceover and color art to deliver its narrative, and the seed that would inevitably sprout into a rich, branching tree of lore had been planted. And lest we forget, Orcs and Humans also made first use of what happens when you click on a unit one too many times.
What? Stop poking me!
The battle ensued across 12 single-player missions, with the building blocks borrowing heavily from Dune 2, the Rosetta Stone for most modern RTS games. Inheriting the example set by its forefathers, Orcs and Humans stuck closely to the trifecta of resource gathering, base building, and unit commandeering to define its gameplay. But it also wasn't shy about adding some magic of its own. Multiple unit selection bolstered its solid mouse-driven controls, and skirmishes were decided by the proper use of the unique fantasy-themed buildings and the units taking part in them. The gold and lumber harvested from your workers were invested in structures that could be built around the map. From the town hall to the farm, barracks, temple, and blacksmith, each building either served the purpose of making or upgrading units. In a somewhat odd design choice, roads had to be constructed for buildings to be placed down beside them. Though this archaic mechanic never made it back into future Warcraft games, it would inevitably morph its way back into later titles as the reconfigured Zerg Creep in StarCraft, and later the Undead Blight in Warcraft 3. From the lowly orc peon to the mighty human conjurer, each unit carried out respective roles in the ongoing fight for survival. Though mostly identical at face value, each race's units actually had certain nuances that distinguished them from their racial counterpart. Orc spearmen did more damage than the human archers, but at the cost of reduced range. Likewise, the spells and summons of the cleric and conjurer varied substantially with that of the necrolite and warlock. Though slight, the differences between each race were present even from Warcraft's outset, and the divide between them would continue to grow. Not long after its release, Orcs and Humans garnered critical praise and a number of awards from various media outlets, earning Blizzard Entertainment its first best-selling title. Warcraft's debut was a hit, and they had no intentions of slowing down. With the iron still hot, the team hastily went to work on a second title that sought to eclipse the success of Orcs and Humans in every way possible. That game would eventually be known as Warcraft 2: Tides of Darkness, released on December 9, 1995 for the PC and Macintosh, and 2 years later for the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation. Tides of Darkness picked up 6 years after the ending of the Orc campaign in Orcs and Humans, writing off the Human campaign's victorious ending entirely as non-canonical.
The once mighty army of Azeroth lay among the blackened and charred remains of Stormwind Keep.
Instead, the remaining human survivors of Azeroth fled to the forests of Lordaeron, battered and bruised from the Orcs' campaign of slaughter. It was during this time that the humans made contact with the magical High Elves of Quel'Thalas and the sturdy dwarves of Cosmodan, eventually forming the union dedicated to repelling the Orcish invasion, the Alliance. Elsewhere, the Orcs formed unions of their own, partnering with the barbaric tribes of ogres and trolls scattered throughout Azeroth to establish the Horde. Azeroth flourished, aided in part by two key players that would later play pivotal roles in defining the essence of the Warcraft universe. Chris Metzen, an illustrator for Orcs and Humans, stepped up as Darkness's lore and campaign designer, shaping the various lands and scenarios. Samwise Didier, who also served as an illustrator in Orcs and Humans, reprised his role for Tides of Darkness. This time, the increased resolution of the SVGA graphics had allowed Samwise's distinct art style to peek through. Despite only a year's difference between games, Blizzard was able to make significant improvements to Warcraft's mechanics from the top down. The mouse-driven controls now benefited from right-clicking, and sophisticated features like control groups, double-click quick selection, and the continued use of hotkeys kept organization clean and productivity high. Humans gained access to the spry elvish archers, while orcs got a helping hand from the devastating ogre magi. Vehicular siege units like the catapult returned, along with the appearance of guard towers and aerial and naval units like the flying goblin zeppelin and the gnomish submarine. With land, air, and sea now equally viable grounds for battle, strategies in Warcraft reached new heights. But to fuel these mechanical juggernauts, a third harvestable resource, oil, was required. Like the short-lived road system before it, however, the oil mechanic never made it past the shores of Warcraft 2 and into future games. With roads out of the way, buildings could now be placed with greater freedom and speed around the map. Expanding base operations to outlying expansions was a simpler task, and skirmishes benefited from a brisker pace. One of the more interesting additions, the now ubiquitous Fog of War, added a layer of intrigue to the mix by only allowing players to see the immediate area around their units. As a result, scouting with peasants and air units became an essential part of competitive play. Up until then, RTS games lacked tools for players to customize and create their own maps to play. But all that changed thanks to a little-known programmer named Daniel Lemberg. A Warcraft 2 player, Lemberg reverse-engineered the game's map files and created War2XED, one of the first known map editors released for public use. Though obscure today, Lemberg's contribution would inevitably pave the way for map editors as mandatory features in RTS games, along with the creatively obsessed subculture that goes with it. Blizzard's second attempt at delivering the action of Azeroth to the masses was a resounding success, earning the company its first ever Game of the Year award from various publications.
The Orcish hordes lay vanquished as the triumphant armies of the Alliance stood vigil over the evil gateway that had brought the Orcs into Azeroth.
A year later, Blizzard followed up Tides of Darkness with Beyond the Dark Portal, a Warcraft 2 expansion. Developed by Cyberlore Studios, Dark Portal followed up the events of Tides of Darkness with 2 new campaigns, several new hero units, and a handful of multiplayer maps. Though Command & Conquer from Westwood Studios beat Warcraft to the punch in terms of online multiplayer, the two games quickly gained notoriety for being the first few RTS titles to be played competitively online through network IPX emulators. In 1999, Warcraft 2 was able to abandon its archaic network limitations with Warcraft 2 Battle.net Edition, a compilation that included the base game, expansion, and an all-new online functionality transplanted from the one present in 1997's Diablo and Blizzard's other RTS phenomenon, StarCraft. With all of its success, the Warcraft series had firmly planted itself as Blizzard's claim to fame, the bread and butter that would bring the company continued success in the years to come. With the sky as the limit, the company embarked on an ambitious side project that would break away from its fantasy real-time strategy roots and explore a different realm entirely, the adventure game.
22 years have passed since Blackmoor found the young Orkling. Secretly raising the Orkling within the confines of his prison fortress, Durnhold, Blackmoor planned to mold the Orkling into the perfect warrior.
Warcraft Adventures Lord of the Clans began development in 1996. The creative team behind the first 2 games, now helmed by Chris Metzen, set itself to create a story inspired by adventure games such as Maniac Mansion and Monkey Island. Using hand-drawn art provided by the animation house Animation Magic, the game gave players a different window to the realms of Azeroth, following the events of Beyond the Dark Portal. Over the course of 2 years, Adventures saw a number of delays and postponements, and by then, the PC adventure genre that inspired it had faded into history. By May of 1998, Blizzard formally announced that Warcraft Adventures had officially been cancelled, citing that the game didn't live up to the high standards set by its previous releases. In its 7 years of operation, Blizzard had yet to experience such a bitter loss. It was a lesson felt all too well for the fledgling company, but from the sting of defeat came an unwavering resolve to cultivate its products to the highest levels of quality. Before long, a steadfast policy of releasing games when they were truly ready would come to define Blizzard, a hardy goal that would birth some of the company's most impressive achievements, as well as put an untimely end to some of its most anticipated titles. Though Warcraft Adventures had already long been laid to rest, Blizzard felt that the tale it had to tell was far too important to let go just yet. Working under a tight schedule, Star Trek novelist Christy Golden was contracted by the company to write a novelization based on scripts and outlines provided by Metzen himself. That book would later be released in 2001 as Warcraft Lord of the Clans, and would tell the tale of a little-known war chief in training named Thrall. next chapter of the Warcraft saga, a new game rises from the ashes of defeat, heralding the triumphant return of Blizzard's most beloved franchise, and the leap into 3D. Though Orcs and Humans and Tides of Darkness had undoubtedly propelled Blizzard Entertainment's early success in the industry, the ultimate disappointment of Warcraft Adventures thrust the series' future into uncharted waters. With Lord of the Clans left to collect dust in its silicon sarcophagus, it seemed that the chance to unravel Warcraft's rich lore, too, had been lost forever.
It was I who was betrayed.
But with luck, Adventure's story would yet find roots in a new title, and blossom into one of the greatest epics of the Warcraft universe.
The sands of time have run out, son of Duratan.
By the end of the 90s, Blizzard Entertainment had firmly established itself in the gaming world as a force to be reckoned with. Stretching its wings further and further with bold new IPs, the company seemed nearly infallible. The huge success of Diablo claimed Blizzard's rightful stake in the online front, and the tremendous popularity and innovation of StarCraft left little to the imagination in just what else could be done with the RTS genre. Fans waited with bated breath for Blizzard's next move. Could it be StarCraft 2? Or maybe Diablo 3? Unfortunately, the public wouldn't catch wind of an official announcement for either title until nearly a decade later, but what they would get proved to be every bit as good, and surprising.
We stand now upon the brink of destruction, for the reign of chaos has come at last.
Warcraft 3: Reign of Chaos was released on July 3, 2002. Rob Pardo, who had done previous work on StarCraft and Brood War, took up lead designing duties for the project. Lore writer Chris Metzen graduated to the role of creative director, while longtime series artist Samwise Didier made the ranks of art director, titles that the two hold to this very day. Warcraft 3's creative team spanned an impressive resume of old and new blood contributing to the project, not the least of which were composers Tracy W. Bush, Derek Duke, Jason Hayes, and Glenn Stafford, the musicians responsible for shaping the sound of Warcraft as we know it today. And the now world-famous Blizzard Cinematics department that produced some of the most impressive pieces of CG in a game to date.
The remnants of the past scar the land, which is besieged once again by conflict.
Hear me, Night Elves. The time for reckoning has come.
Warcraft 3's expansive storyline was far more ambitious than any that had preceded it. Beginning with the harrowing vision of an unknown threat, Reign of Chaos set into motion the story of one of Azeroth's original evils, and the valiant efforts of the heroes that would band against it. It was a tale of corruption and betrayal, detailing the rise and fall of some of video game history's most tragic characters. But it was also one of redemption, molding perceptions of the once barbaric orcs into the noble tribe of shamanistic warriors portrayed today.
I appreciate your help, Miss Proudmoore. Yet another day I thought I'd never live to see.
The world of Azeroth was expanding, and by all accounts, its lore had transcended into a universe all into its own. It would only take an equally ambitious game to tether it all into place. The vision set the bar for a game unlike any the company had ever seen before, one that would marry the deep history of Warcraft with a flexible 3D engine to deliver the experience. Originally, Reign of Chaos's game design was conceived more along the lines of an RPG, but the concept came with a few obstacles. The proposed camera angle was fixed to a near first-person viewpoint, limiting the player's scope of the map and interaction with nearby buildings. The idea would also scale back on the number of units present, as well as the way that they would be controlled in battle. After careful contemplation, the team inevitably settled back on the series' RTS roots, now with an isometric view and a free-roaming camera. But even though the concept of a role-playing strategy game had slipped into the ether, Blizzard wasn't intent on abandoning all of its RPG-themed concepts just yet. Each racial campaign in Reign of Chaos consisted of a seamless line of quests that revealed the immediate objective at hand. Some objectives came as a result of plot developments occurring at the beginning of each mission, unveiled through in-game cutscenes utilizing the new 3D engine. Others were completely optional, accepted through hidden quest givers sporting familiar-looking exclamation marks above their heads. When played in a linear sequence, each racial campaign culminated in one grand overarching story, a move that mimics StarCraft's own take on delivering its exposition. Though Warcraft 3 borrowed from a number of StarCraft's innovations, it was still unique. The team instilled a fundamental design choice: less is more. Originating as an experiment headed by Pardo and his team, the mantra was put into action by giving buildings and units in StarCraft a 300% increase in cost and hit points. The results were, in Pardo's own words, interesting. Players spent less time managing their base and more time actively controlling their units. To further refine the formula, Warcraft 3 was given a lower food cap, an upkeep system to keep armies small, and intuitive squad formations to give players better control of their diminutive battalions. The board had already been set. All it needed now were its pawns. With the dawning of Reign of Chaos, the defining factors between orcs and humans had finally separated into distinct playstyles of their own. Unrivaled in brute strength, the battle-hardened orcs laid claim to some of the game's strongest ground melee units. The versatile humans, on the other hand, found equal footing on all grounds of combat, aided by the utility of powerful spellcasters and siege units. Apart from the return of one of Azeroth's oldest rivals, Warcraft 3 also saw the entrance of two new adversaries. The clandestine Night Elves, masters of magic and mobility, were lords of the bow and arrow, while the enduring undead found much use in an unlikely resource: corpses. With the armies of Azeroth ready for war, all they needed now were their generals, the hero unit. Unlike Warcraft 2's hero units, which were merely brawnier versions of base units, the hero units of Warcraft 3 were uniquely realized, spell-heavy fighters, specific to each race. Summoned from various altars, these heroes had to be subsequently leveled, equipped, and cared for in combat, but for all the toil came a powerful ally to shift the tides of battle. Heavy on micro and RPG elements alike, the hero unit was the cherry on top of the Warcraft 3 sundae. Apart from the four main races, several lore-related races entered the fray as support units, from the orcs' Taurens to the humans' Dwarven Riflemen. And in an RPG twist, several neutral units could be drafted at taverns scattered around the map. Also placed around the map were the newly introduced Creep, throngs of neutral enemy units that could be killed for gold, hero experience, and the occasional dropped item. With Creep often guarding outlying gold mines, shops, and fountains, taking proactive measures to eliminate them reduced turtling and encouraged players to feel their way around the map, now referred to as creeping. Though now, with a decreased focus, base building and management still received a considerable number of upgrades from past installments. Along with streamlined tech trees, each race benefited from unique base features such as the humans' cooperative building ability, the orcs' spiky fortified defenses, the Night Elves' living ancients, and the undead summoning mechanic. Understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each race's quirks was essential information, and putting that knowledge to practice was tantamount to victory. Outside of the base, various environmental factors also played a part in the ebb and flow of battle. Terrain differences contributed to accuracy of ranged fire, while day and night cycles dictated the sight range of units, as well as the effects of certain spells, like the Night Elves' Shadow Meld. In a sense, Warcraft 3 tempered the raw essence of StarCraft's frenetic action into a slower-paced and more focused game that emphasized micro over macro, the ability to manage units versus managing the economy. With a heavy slant towards balance in combat, Warcraft 3 provided natural grounds for competitive online play. Multiplayer ensued on Battle.net, Blizzard's free online service established in 1997. With StarCraft's team-based skirmish format as the template, Warcraft 3 added a few choice innovations of its own to augment the online experience. Units and resources could be traded among team members in a pinch, computer allies could be assigned, impartial observers could spectate matches, and even player army colors could be picked from the match's outset. On top of that, Warcraft 3 also provided some notable features to facilitate competitive play, including anonymous matchmaking, online profiles with detailed stats, clan support for player guilds, and the option to join team ladders and regularly scheduled tournaments. Seeking to top the enormous success of StarCraft's complex map editor, Warcraft 3's robust world editor found instant recognition with the game's modding community. Still considered today as one of the best in the biz, the feature-rich creation tool birthed a number of runaway hits, including the infectious tower defense game and the cult craze Defense of the Ancients, or for short, Dota.
Det är det enda ni gör på dagarna. Ni sitter i där ventrilo och spelar Dota.
Vi sitter här i väntan och spelar lite Dota. I hear you, man.
Some would say that these once underground custom maps have since grown to be more popular than the game itself. Dota, in particular, is now officially adopted as an esport in some gaming tournaments around the world. Whatever your stance may be, there's no denying that such a trend would have never existed without a game solid enough to support it. Debuting to universal acclaim, Warcraft 3 made its mark in Blizzard history as one of the most popular video game releases ever, with nearly 4.5 million units shipped to stores and more than 1 million of those units sold in little under a month, beating the previous record set by Diablo in 2000. The prodigal son had returned, and it would enjoy its spot as one of the top PC games in the years to follow.
Betrayer.
A year later, on July 1st, 2003, Blizzard released Warcraft 3's expansion pack, The Frozen Throne, featuring a host of new heroes, units, tile sets, maps, and features specific to both the single and multiplayer aspects of the game. The newly packaged campaigns outline the events following the successful rout of the Burning Legion at the end of Reign of Chaos, putting into play a number of interesting occurrences along the way. Thrall would gather his people and found the Orcish capital of Orgrimmar, while the Banshee Queen Lady Sylvanas Windrunner would earn her free will from her masters, going on to establish the splintered faction of Undead Rebels.
From here on out, we shall be known as the Forsaken.
Illidan the Betrayer would later proclaim himself the Lord of Outland, while the Death Knight Arthas would ascend the icy slopes of the Frozen Throne and crown himself the one true Lich King. The dangling threads of fate set the stage for an epic adventure. All it needed now were its adventurers. As the Warcraft epic unravels, a new world of wonder lies in wait, cultivating one of video games' most immersive universes and a phenomenon that would take the planet by storm. Warcraft has taken on a number of forms in and out of the RTS over the years, but what it would tackle next would prove to be its biggest undertaking of all. The universe would trade away its small band of troops only to receive a world militia in return. One wouldn't have guessed it then, but when orcs and humans treated players to its cryptic opening, it was a prelude of things to come.
Drums of war thunder once again.
term MMORPG, or Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game, wouldn't be coined until fantasy maven Richard Garriott put his stamp on it, with 1997's Ultima Online. But in reality, the genre's history had roots even back in the days of disco. The summer of '73 plunged players in a Maze War, a multi-user first-person romp on the MLAC PDS-1, which brought the concepts of persistent virtual worlds, visually represented player avatars, and most importantly, network play to life. 1985 would trade passageways for peninsulas with the CompuServe RPG Islands of Kesmai, while AOL would have an adventure of its own with the graphical Neverwinter Nights in 1991. The mid-90s would see the genre take its baby steps towards immersion with The Realm Online, 3D with Meridian 59, and mass popularity with Ultima. But it wouldn't be until 1999's EverQuest that the genre would level up to the massively multiplayer construct played today, defining many modern concepts of the genre, along with its stigmas. The MMO had finally found its Moses, but its commandments were carved by the hardcore. EverQuest, however, isn't the topic of this tale. It's about Legacy of Steel, one of the game's top-rating guilds. Its leader at the time, Ariel, was too busy to handle the day-to-day dealings of the guild, so the reins were handed off to Tiggle, the second in command. Over time, the two would maintain contact and share ideas about improving the deep, but ultimately flawed game they played, until finally, the time came for them to put their money to the test. As it turns out, Ariel was none other than Rob Pardo, and he would go on to recruit Tiggle, now known to us as Jeff Kaplan, to help design the game dreamt up in those chat logs so long ago. After nearly 5 years of careful planning and testing alongside the development of Warcraft 3: Reign of Chaos, World of Warcraft made its debut on November 23, 2004, a full 10 years after Orcs and Humans first assaulted diskettes in the 90s. Pardo, who shared co-lead designing duties with Alan Adam, collaborated with Kaplan and a number of other designers in shaping the vision of Azeroth. Tom Chilton had done previous work with Ultima Online, while Alex Afrasiabi came from the influential and sometimes controversial Fires of Heaven Guild. 4 years after the events of the Frozen Throne, the flimsy bonds that united the Alliance and Horde had since dissolved, bringing about old grudges and inflicting new wounds in the process. The game set the precedent for a conflict unlike any the world of Azeroth had seen, and it would demand a world stage for its events to play out. The hardcore shell of the MMO would be a tough nut to crack, but the team was equipped with a toolbox of ideas. At the end of the day, accessibility for both the hardcore and casual stood as the forefront of Blizzard's design philosophy, and it would come to define World of Warcraft as a whole. In Pardo's own words, players didn't necessarily need to know the lingo. We're going to teach them all that. Education started at the very beginning. After drawing straws with realm selection, players were thrust into the character creation process with a number of options encompassing gender, race, class, and appearance. The races drew from Azeroth's established stock. Alliance players could choose from humans, night elves, gnomes, and dwarves, while the Horde players selected from orcs, trolls, tauren, and Sylvanas' newly reformed undead. The classes were Blizzard's take on classic MMO tropes, but they each had their own identities. Rage accrued in battle fueled the warrior's efforts, while a combo point system akin to Diablo II's Assassin class provided the blueprint for the rogue's offense. Priests found themselves more self-sufficient with the aid of offensive shadow magic, while mages could conjure up a number of tricks to dish out the damage and food. The pet-based hunters were masters of tracking and traps, druids the jack of all trades, and warlocks, fel magic, and demonology. Rounding out World of Warcraft's roster of classes were the paladin and shaman, hybrid classes that were previously specific only to their respective factions, but have since found homes on both sides of the struggle. After the finishing touches to the character were set, players were ejected to one of 6 starting locations where they would pick up on the basics of the game. quests were established early on as a central means of progression, earning player characters a tidy sum of experience points with each turn-in. With enough XP, characters would level up, bequeathing an increase in stats and a set of new skills to learn through skill trainers situated at cities and towns. Inevitably, each zone's clusters of quests would lead players to a 5-man instance to complete. With the Alliance's Westfall as the template, many other areas in the game would follow its example, setting up a flow of zone progression that was quick, fun, and painless. And if that rabid boar happened to get the best of you, the penalties of death weren't quite as severe as other games. Players were back on their feet in mere minutes. Once the player was ready to stretch their legs outside of the sandbox, travel, in the form of boats, trains, and flight points, allowed quick transit around zones, chopping down needless runaround, as well as the zone-loading borders prevalent in many other MMOs at the time. If players needed to get back to town, quick transport was only a Hearthstone's throw away. By the player's 20s, their character would have accumulated a number of skill points to invest among 3 different talent trees for their class. If World of Warcraft were a website, this would be its personality test. What sort of build you spec'd into defined your playstyle in the game, and to a greater extent, the role that you would play in parties. Team play would also come into effect around this time as an essential part of the experience, either through completing difficult group quests, or for running instances to score XP and fat loot along the way. With team play came the social aspect of the game. Socializing through general chat and at the old meeting stones often brought about the formation of parties and the occasional guild invite, though now the process is streamlined somewhat by built-in functions to whittle out like-minded adventurers. And of course, what would socializing be without a little dancing? A player in their 30s would then begin to realize that money makes the world go round, or at least makes it zoom by really fast on the back of a mount. To save up pennies for the mount and riding training, players took up gathering or crafting professions to sell their wares in the auction house. Making ends meet through picking herbs or mining ore wasn't all that uncommon, and it was entirely worth it. Once you strutted your stuff on your new 4-legged friend, it was considered by many as the game's rite of passage. At the eve of a player's 40s, the game was well into approaching its endgame stretch. Azeroth's remaining instances would eventually grow increasingly elaborate in design, culminating in the serpentine labyrinths of Blackrock Depths. Though not the last of instances leading up to 60, its intricate layout, multi-directional paths, and sheer size set the tone for the raids to follow. Blizzard may have made a few concessions toward newcomers, but the team wasn't quick to forget about its roots. When players finally cleared the final hurdle leading to level 60, there were a number of hardcore raids waiting for them at the top of the hill. One of the first was Molten Core, a 40-man undertaking that took place in the fiery chasms of Blackrock Mountain. Here, many of EverQuest's influences came pouring through. Packs of elite trash mobs stood as murderous obstacles leading to each daunting boss encounter, which was no walk in the park itself. Elsewhere, single boss encounters like Onyxia tested wits and coordination with uniquely scripted behaviors and stage-like phases. World of Warcraft's endgame proved to be just as intense as any other, pushing many of its players to go back to the drawing board time and time again, until their strategies were honed to a seamless battle plan. Down the line, Blizzard would only add to the scope of its encounters, with additional downloadable raids packaged with its content patches. With every successive increase in difficulty came a new epic tier set to go with it, a leapfrogging effect that would allow guilds to go up the food chain as long as their gear was up to it. But for some, raiding proved to be an undesirable path for those with less time to commit to the game. Introduced in patch 1.4, the PvP honor system allowed players to rack up honor points and rank by slaying players on the opposite faction. With enough notches on your belt, players could purchase gear with gold comparable to what dropped in high-end raids. The system provided an interesting means for the more casual crowd to compete, but it was merely the foundation. At the time, PvP was almost entirely player-run, with no backing structure to funnel the fight into one place. All that changed with the advent of patch 1.5, which put the now famous PvP battlegrounds into effect. Similar in concept to popular match types like Capture the Flag and King of the Hill, Battlegrounds allowed honor to come in droves and turn the organized chaos of PvP into a well-oiled machine. But the system wasn't without its faults. The incredulous honor grind proved to be just as demanding as raiding itself, taking months just to get pieces of the set at a time. In time, however, PvP would grow as a viable endgame activity with less stringent requirements. Later patches would add cross-server play, additional battlegrounds, better gear sets, and a number of tweaks to keep the system as fair as possible. Eventually, the honor system would give way to a new philosophy that treated the points more as a separate currency than as a prerequisite for buying equipment, putting an end to rank grinding. But every once in a blue moon, a ghost of the past would make their rare appearance in town, sporting that elusive title of Seasons Long Gone. The impact that World of Warcraft had on the genre was felt immediately. For the first time, a mainstream MMO gave its players the means to adapt, play, and enjoy the game as they saw fit, unhindered by high ceilings, glacial grinds, or unreasonable learning curves. But at the same time, it also allowed hard-boiled vets to test their mettle in environments that changed by the month, and with frequent tweaks, the metagame was always shifting. Patches of new content covering zones, instances, loot, world holiday events, and features were dealt out in alarming regularity. Other games would have warranted an expansion for such content. World of Warcraft made it free. And the team's credo of accessibility permeated all facets of play, affecting even the way the game could be viewed, with client-side UI customization and add-ons to enhance the experience. The bar set by EverQuest was usurped by a new world power, and its influence would only continue to grow. On January 16, 2007, Blizzard rolled out the carpet on World of Warcraft: The Burning Crusade. As the first official expansion for the game, Burning Crusade introduced a new world zone, raised the level cap to 70, and introduced new races, the Draenei and Blood Elves. The reemergence of the Burning Legion cast aside old quarrels once again, and a new war erupted in the shattered realm of Outland. Players received new spells, talents, and gear to bolster the war effort, as well as took to the skies with the aid of the Flying Mount. Battles raged on in the new Eye of the Storm battleground, while several world PvP zones reimagined the borders of combat. A new profession, jewel crafting, brought a newfound source of fortune, and an increased emphasis on reputation had players playing diplomat with other factions. In an interesting paradigm shift, raiding inherited some casual elements, while PvP took on a more hardcore appeal. Raids cleaved player caps and completion times in half, while the arena system provided fiercely competitive grounds for 2-on-2, 3-on-3, and 5-on-5 combat. Later patches would send players racing against Illidan and Kil'jaeden, as well as new seasons of PvP gear to keep blades sharp and fingers clicking, until the inevitable boat ride to Northrend. In 2007, World of Warcraft: The Burning Crusade sold a record-setting 2.4 million copies within the first 24 hours of its release, making it the fastest-selling PC game to this day. It is indisputably the most played MMORPG of all time, and at the rate it's going, the upcoming expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, won't be long to follow. World of Warcraft will be remembered in the annals of video game history as a full-blown phenomenon, played the world over by fans spanning every race, culture, and age group. Reaching the rare status of pop culture fandom, it's taken on a new life outside of the game, in machinima, comics, toys, cards, novels, and even television.
World of Warcraft, I need to play!
World of Warcraft?
I don't play World of Warcraft.
I have never met a woman this into World of Warcraft.
It's a silent passion of mine.
That's how you two met online?
Butters, go buy World of Warcraft, install it on your computer, and join the online sensation before we all murder you.
Oh, all right then.
It's parodied and revered all the same by the people that play it. and for most, Azeroth has very much become a home away from home. As of October 28, 2008, World of Warcraft has reached over 11 million subscribers in all its territories, equaling nearly half the population of Australia. While a bit shy of the 6 billion inhabitants of planet Earth, Blizzard's been known to think big. Perhaps someday, the World of Warcraft will truly live up to its name. As our look at the past comes to an end, we take one last glance at a world of history, spanning planets, continents, and people 10,000 years in the making.